several of the shows. In my day job, in my other life, I'm a professor and the head of humanities and arts at Worcester Polytechnic Institute out on the East Coast in Massachusetts. I'm joined by my partner.
My name is Isabel Smith-Bernstein. I'm the other place. I'm our director and festival dramaturg. This is my 5th season here at USF. When I'm not here, I live in Boulder, Colorado, where I'm a freelance dramaturg and a doctoral student.
So we are going to talk this morning about Twelfth Night. Our director is getting on a plane today, so unfortunately we're not going to have Sam White with us. We will be joined by the director of Henry VI at 10 o'clock, so we'll get to ask him questions. I was the dramaturg for Twelfth Night, so I was in the room for all of the rehearsals, and hopefully we'll be able to answer your questions about the rehearsal process as well as the play. Both Isabel and I are specialists in Shakespeare in performance, which is also why we're here. So just a little bit of background on Twelfth Night that I think is interesting at this festival. Twelfth Night is written in about 1600, 1601, same time as Hamlet. So I find it interesting to think about that the playwright writing both of these plays within the same time frame and what he might have been thinking about in producing both of them. We have some records from 1602 from a playgoer who saw it and who made a quote that I find interesting. He says, "We had a play called Twelfth Night, or what you will, much like the Comedy of Errors." So this was a frequent playgoer who noticed the twin similarity. You can check out the Comedy of Errors next season. Maybe you've seen that announcement in your brochure or your playbill so far. And this is also a play that leans heavily on festivity. So the title, Twelfth Night, you can probably figure that out. It's the 12th night of Christmas, which in Elizabethan England was typically a time of festivity. Where should we start?
Well, since Sam, our director, isn't here, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about her vision of the play and sort of her idea of setting it when she did.
Great. So Sam has a background as a stand-up comedian and really wanted to focus on comedy and wanted to lean into the joy of the production. So she anchored it in large part by the twin story. You know that one of our overarching themes at the festival is family. And so that was really an anchor for her this year. If you saw the set design by Apollo Mark Weaver, you probably noticed one of the first things, 2 giant statues. Did you figure out who they were? Okay. Well, I heard it. Somebody said it. Yeah. Artemis and Apollo. Artemis and Apollo. So famously, they were twins, right? So she wanted to emphasize from mythology and from Greek mythology that heritage of the 2 twins who are important gods within that mythological system. So she started with that prologue with the twins. We saw a relationship with each other. We saw them taking part in a wrestling match. And so Viola knows her brother and Sebastian knows his sister. They shared a room. They've played together. They've wrestled together. They're on a ship together. And then we begin with the storm. So she was also thinking about Illyria as Elysium, kind of a fantasy play, not really set anywhere. What is Illyria? Where is Illyria? She went into the 17th century. You probably, I love the 17th century costumes we had, the beautiful detail of those costumes. So she said 17th century, but it was inflected a little bit through the music because the play is so heavily musical by Sam's own background. Sam is from Detroit. Did you pick up on the music? Anybody identify the songs? Yeah, they were all Motown, right? So they were Motown songs set in a 17th century way. The one, Just Like Romeo and Juliet, does anyone know that song? Her uncle wrote that. So she wanted to have a little bit of Detroit and Motown flavor filtered into the 17th century.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to open it up to questions now. Darcy will be running a microphone around. And Kate really was present for all the rehearsals, so she can answer almost all the questions that you can ask them.
Yeah. Just grab one of the mics. Yes. Thank you.
All right. Anybody? Hands? All right. Well, obviously a big part of the show is Viola being dressed up as a man, and my question is, what particularly went into this duality of having to be both a woman and a man? Yeah, that's a really good question. Where did you notice the duality? Let me ask you first. In this production, where did you see it? Well, particularly at the beginning when she's dressed as a woman, but she still has the masculine characteristics of having it tied up and she's wrestling. And so I was wondering, and then towards the end when she can take on her identity as a woman again, even with her interactions with her brother, she still has some more masculine characteristics. She's doing like the bro stuff with him. So I was wondering, oh, there we go. Try again. Hello. Oh, you're back. Okay. So I was just wondering if there was something particular that the actress did in, exploring that. Yeah, that's a really good observation and question. I'm going to point to the set and then talk about the actors. So those Apollo and the Artemis statues, if you really looked at them, their faces were meant to be more androgynous. So she had shorter hair and more masculine features with a sort of feminine body, and he had longer hair and more feminine features. So we really sort of leaned into their duality and the kind of androgynous nature there. We spent 4 hours in rehearsal on what Sam called twin work, and it was all movement work. So there's an acting technique called plastiques. Also, both of the actors, Tristan, who played Sebastian, and Sarah, who played Viola, are dancers. So we spent 4 hours on one day on movement work, where they worked with each other to think through how would their movement be similar, how would growing up with a sister or growing up with a brother have impacted them. There's all kinds of really interesting studies about birth order, but there are also studies about what's it like to grow up being the only brother with sisters or the only sister with brothers. I think about my dad's family. He has 5 sisters. He's the only boy in that family. Anyone relate to that, right? Like, what's it like to grow up with siblings? So she knows more than your average bear about boys, right? Because she's grown up with him. And so that wrestling scene was really meant to emphasize for both of them what they have experienced. Those 17th century costumes as well lean into what you're seeing, that duality. Men's fashion at the time was what we might call feminine, right? So ruffles and lace collars and the bows on the shoes, and the men wore heels. So both the men and the women had similarities in their dress, and so the costumes helped with that. They also went with kind of longer hair for both of them for those similarities. If you saw Tristan and Sarah walking down the street, they don't look at all alike. But the costumes, the hair, the movement work helped them look more like twins. And I think that's a nice observation to see what the production was doing, because Shakespeare leans into that as well. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? We know in Shakespeare's time, all the roles were played by men who then, so think about Viola, we have a boy cross-dressing to play the character of Viola, who cross-dresses to play Cesario. So you have these layers of gender that Shakespeare is exploring. Shakespeare got to that question of gender fluid long before we did.
I like the part where Malvolio was trying to smile, with all of the machinations of trying to smile. And I'm wondering how much of that was the director imposing those comedic aspects, or how much of that was the actual actor?
That was a great question. It was about Malvolio and smiling, and how much was the director and how much was the actor. So that actor is Chris Nixon. If you have been coming to the festival, you have probably seen him in other things. Last season, he was in The Foreigner, if you saw The Foreigner. Chris has a great comic timing, and he has an incredible comic talent. That was Chris. He actually started that on the first day of rehearsal. The very first day of rehearsal is often what we call a read-through, which is exactly what it sounds like. Sit around the table, you'll read the play. And on the very first day in that scene, he started doing things with his face, and like starting to make the smile. And that first read through, he had everybody in stitches, and it grew and grew and grew from there. I've seen a lot of 12th nights. Has anyone seen other 12th nights? Right? I've never seen that version of Malvolio trying to get him get himself to smile. That was really Chris, and she just let him run with it because he knew what he was up to with that. It's like an auction. If you wave your hand, you bought the item.
I've seen quite a few 12 nights, and actually what I loved about this one, and I just want to know your comment, from the music to some of the physical characteristics, from shrubs to the monogram on Malvolio's dressing gown. She just interspersed modern things, modern behaviors, without at all messing up the text. So if you comment on the thought process, because it wasn't overdone. You see when people do Shakespeare, they're always trying to put it in different places and maybe do it really modern. It wasn't, but it was subtle.
Great, that's really nice to hear. That's really a collaboration with the director and the designers that starts months before we arrive in Cedar and get into the rehearsal room. So when the director gets the play and learns which designers they're going to be working on, they have several months of conversation, collaboration, where the director will begin to present her ideas.